History is written in the blood of warriors. Across centuries, on battlefields that stretched from the deserts of Persia to the mountains of Japan, certain men rose above all others, not just as soldiers, but as living legends of death and strategy. They weren't just fighters. They were symbols of power, terror, and unshakable will. And today, we're counting down the top 10 deadliest warriors in history, ranked and explained. Stay with us, because you're about to meet the men whose names echoed through time, whose enemies trembled at their approach, and whose stories still shape our world today. From gladiators who defied empires to conquerors who carved out kingdoms with blood and steel, this is the ultimate countdown of history's most unstoppable warriors. Now, let's begin with number 10. Spartacus, the gladiator who defied Rome. In the dust and sand of the Roman amphitheater, a man stood battered but unbroken. His name was Spartacus, and though he was born a free man in Thrace, fate delivered him into the chains of slavery. Rome made him a gladiator, forcing him to fight for the entertainment of thousands. But what Rome didn't realize was that it was forging a weapon that would one day turn against them. In 73 BC, Spartacus broke free. With only a handful of gladiators at his side, armed with kitchen knives and stolen weapons, he ignited one of the greatest slave rebellions in Roman history. That ragtag group swelled into an army of nearly 70,000 men and women, slaves and farmers, bandits and shepherds, all drawn to the banner of freedom that Spartacus raised. Against Rome's finest legions, Spartacus proved himself more than a survivor. He was a commander. He crushed Roman forces sent to stop him, time and time again, outmaneuvering generals who underestimated him. His army marched through Italy, defeating disciplined soldiers with little more than desperation, courage, and his iron will. For 2 years, Spartacus made the mighty republic tremble. Senators whispered his name in fear. Roman children were told stories of the gladiator who could not be chained. But in 71 BC, on the plains of southern Italy, his rebellion met its end. Surrounded by the legions of Marcus Crassus, Spartacus refused to flee. Ancient historians say that he fought his way directly toward Crassus himself, cutting through lines of Roman soldiers before being overwhelmed. Spartacus fell, but not in chains, not in the arena, not as a slave. He died a warrior's death, leading his men in battle against the most powerful empire of his age. Spartacus never won a kingdom, never carved an empire, but his legacy is one of defiance. To the oppressed, he became a symbol of freedom. To Rome, he was a nightmare made flesh. And to history, he remains one of the deadliest warriors to ever live, a gladiator who shook the foundations of the empire itself. Number 9. Miyamoto Musashi, the sword saint of Japan. 17th century Japan was an age of samurai, where honor was carried on the blade of a katana, and a warrior's life could be measured in a single duel. But among all these swordsmen, one name rose above the rest: Miyamoto Musashi, the man who lived and breathed the way of the sword, and whose legend would grow so great. The Japanese still call him Kensei, the sword saint. Musashi's story begins not in luxury, but in blood. At the age of 13, he fought his first duel against a trained samurai warrior. Most boys that age were still training, still learning the basics of swordsmanship. Musashi, however, killed his opponent with nothing but a wooden staff. From that moment on, he became a man devoted to combat. Over the course of his life, Musashi fought in more than 60 duels, and he never lost. He faced samurai masters, clansmen, and rival swordsmen who sought to carve their own place in history. Yet none of them could overcome him. His tactics were unorthodox, his timing unpredictable, his ruthlessness unmatched. He often wielded 2 swords at once, creating his own style, known as Nichiren Ichirai Chura, 2 heavens as one. But Musashi wasn't just a warrior of the mind. He believed strategy was as important as strength. In duels, he often intimidated his foes before the first strike, He would arrive, late, disheveled, forcing his opponent into anger or uncertainty, breaking their spirit before the battle even began. His most famous duel was against Sasaki Kajiro, a renowned master nicknamed the Demon of the West. Kajiro was feared for his deadly longsword technique, but Musashi arrived late, armed with nothing but a wooden bokken he had carved from an oar. He killed Kajiro with a single strike. In his later years, Musashi withdrew from dueling and warfare to put his philosophy into words. His book, The Book of Five Rings, is still studied today, not just by martial artists, but by generals, athletes, and business leaders. It is a testament that his wisdom extended far beyond the battlefield. Musashi's legacy is not simply in his unbeaten record, but in the way he embodied the spirit of the warrior. He proved that combat was not just about strength, but about mastery of body, mind, and soul. To this day, in both Japan and across the world, Miyamoto Musashi is remembered as one of history's greatest duelists, a man whose sword carved his immortality. Now, we leave the calm duels of feudal Japan and march to the windswept steppes of Central Asia, where a nomadic warlord led horsemen who would shake the foundations of Europe, Asia, and beyond. Number 8. Attila the Hun. The scourge of God in the 5th century, a shadow fell across Europe. It came not from the great cities of Rome or Constantinople, but from the endless steppes of Central Asia, where horsemen lived and died in the saddle. At their head rode a man who will be remembered as one of the most feared conquerors in history, Attila the Hun. Attila was not a king in the Roman sense. He was the warlord of a people forged by hardship, survival, and ceaseless battle. To the Romans, the Huns were monstrous nomads who swept across the plains like a storm, striking with terrifying speed. And Attila was the storm's heart. His enemies called him a scourge of God. Ruthless and cunning, Attila understood the power of terror. When he invaded, entire towns fled before his army even arrived. His warriors, masters of mounted archery, could fire arrows at full gallop with deadly precision, raining death upon enemy ranks before closing in with sabers and spears. Entire armies crumbled beneath this relentless assault. Attila extorted the Eastern Roman Empire, forcing them to pay him tribute of gold so vast it nearly drained their treasury. But gold was not enough. In 451 AD, he turned his gaze westward, invading Gaul modern-day France. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, Attila's forces clashed with a coalition of Romans and Visigoths. It was one of the bloodiest battles of antiquity, a storm of arrows, swords, and screams. Attila was held back, but not destroyed. Even in retreat, he was a threat no one could ignore. When he invaded Italy itself, cities fell at the mere mention of his name. Legend says that when Pope Leo I rode out to meet him, Attila turned back, not because of armies, but because he saw a vision of saints warning him from heaven. Whether myth or truth, the fact remains. The man who terrified Rome chose not to destroy it. Attila died suddenly in 453 AD, on the night of his own wedding. Some say it was a nosebleed, others poison. Whatever the cause, his death left a vacuum so great that the Hun Empire collapsed soon after. But the memory of Attila endured. To his enemies, he was destruction incarnate. To his people, he was the warrior who made empires tremble. In the annals of history, Attila remains not just a conqueror, but a symbol of unstoppable ferocity, a man whose very name meant fear. From the thundering hooves of the Huns, we now sail across cold seas and stormy skies, where fierce raiders from the north struck terror into the heart of Europe. Number 7. Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary Viking raider. In the icy fjords of Scandinavia, where the wind howls and the seas are as unforgiving as the men who sail them, a warrior was born who would terrify kingdoms across Europe, Ragnar Lothbrok. Whether legend or history, his name resonates with the roar of battle, the clash of swords, and the cries of conquered lands. Ragnar was more than a raider. He was a strategist and a visionary. Vikings were feared for their sudden, brutal attacks on monasteries and villages along the coasts of England and Francia. But Ragnar elevated this terror into an art. He was a master of surprise, often striking at dawn or during storms when no army expected an assault. His longships glided like shadows across rivers and oceans, carrying men whose loyalty to him was absolute. Stories say Ragnar descended upon Paris with just a few hundred men, yet his cunning and audacity forced the French king to pay enormous tribute just to avoid total destruction. He knew when to fight, when to retreat, and when to negotiate, but his enemies always feared the day his sword would fall. Ragnar's life was defined by battle and by the ambition to carve his legacy into history. He led raids deep into foreign lands, confronting armies 10 times the size of his own. Vikings were often outnumbered, outmatched, yet Ragnar's leadership turned these disadvantages into advantages, inspiring fear and awe in equal measure. His name became a rallying cry for his warriors, and a curse whispered by terrified peasants and nobles alike. Even his death cemented his legend. Captured by a rival king, he was thrown into a pit of snakes, facing death with defiance. But the tale does not end with despair. His sons rose to continue his legacy, expanding Viking influence across England, Ireland, and beyond. Ragnar Lothbrok embodies the essence of the Viking warrior, ruthless, cunning, and unstoppable. His story is one of adventure and blood, a testament to the indomitable spirit of men who lived and died by the sword. Number 6. Genghis Khan, the founder of the Mongol Empire. Across the windswept steppes of Mongolia, a boy was born as Temujin, who would grow to become a name that made the world tremble. Genghis Khan. From the harshest lands of Asia, where survival demanded strength, cunning, and unyielding determination, he rose to unite the nomadic tribes into an unstoppable force of conquest. Genghis Khan was more than a warrior. He was a master strategist, a ruthless general, and an innovator in the art of war. His armies were disciplined, mobile, and adaptable, capable of striking with the speed of lightning. Archers rode at full gallop, launching arrows with deadly accuracy, while cavalry executed feigned retreats to draw enemies into deadly ambushes. The Mongols under his command were not merely soldiers. They were instruments of fear, precision, and total domination. In his lifetime, Genghis Khan's conquests reshaped the map of the world. He swept through China, Central Asia, Persia, and Eastern Europe, toppling empires with an efficiency that left historians awestruck. Cities that resisted faced total annihilation, while those that surrendered often found mercy. But even in conquest, his genius lay not only in brutality, but in governance. He codified laws, promoted trade, and valued merit over birthright, ensuring his empire would endure long after his death. Legends tell of his ferocity in battle. One story recounts him personally leading charges against fortified cities, appearing in the heart of combat where no one dared follow. His enemies saw him as invincible, almost supernatural, a force of nature incarnate. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had created the largest contiguous empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. But his deadliness wasn't. He measured only in miles conquered or armies destroyed. It was in the psychological terror he instilled. The Mongol name alone struck fear into hearts, ensuring that even those who never saw him would tremble at the thought. Genghis Khan is remembered not just as a conqueror, but as the ultimate embodiment of unstoppable power, a man whose vision, ruthlessness, and brilliance made him one of history's deadliest warriors. From the vast Mongol steppes, we now turn to the Mediterranean, to a man whose tactical genius and ambition threatened to reshape the ancient world. Number 5. Alexander the Great, the conqueror of worlds. In the kingdom of Macedon, a boy named Alexander was tutored by Aristotle, absorbing philosophy, science, and the arts of leadership. But even in youth, It was clear that Alexander was destined for a path far beyond scholarship. He was born to conquer. By the age of 20, he had inherited his father's throne and an army ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Alexander's military genius was unmatched. He combined strategy, discipline, and charisma, leading his troops personally into the heart of battle. At the Battle of Gaugamela, facing a Persian army vastly larger than his own, Alexander orchestrated a victory that would become legendary, cutting through the enemy's lines with precision and timing that still astounds historians today. Yet Alexander was not only a battlefield genius. He inspired loyalty in his men through courage and vision. They followed him across deserts, mountains, and rivers, facing harsh winters, heat, and starvation, all for the chance to witness history being forged. His campaigns stretched from Greece to Egypt, through Persia, and all the way to the edges of India, creating one of the largest empires the world had ever known. But Alexander's deadliness was not merely in his victories. It was in the way he melded psychological warfare with physical dominance. Cities surrendered before his armies even arrived, fearing the reputation of the man who had never lost a battle. His presence on the battlefield was as decisive as his strategy, a living symbol of unstoppable force. Alexander the Great died at just 32, yet in his short life, he became immortal. His tactics, vision, and sheer willpower have influenced generals and leaders for centuries, ensuring that his legacy as one of history's deadliest warriors endures. Number 4. Julius Caesar, the master of Rome and war. In the marble halls of the Roman Republic, a man rose whose ambition would forever alter the course of history. Julius Caesar. Not merely a politician or orator, Caesar was a warrior of extraordinary skill and cunning, leading his legions to victory across Gaul, Britain, and beyond. Caesar understood that warfare was as much about minds as it was about swords. His campaigns were marked by brilliant strategies. He built bridges where none existed, fortified positions in hostile lands, and executed maneuvers that confounded enemies at every turn. At the Battle of Alesia, outnumbered and besieged, Caesar's genius shone. He encircled his foes while defending against reinforcements, achieving a victory that would cement his reputation. But Caesar's deadliness extended beyond tactics. He inspired fierce loyalty in his soldiers, often sharing their hardships, marching with them, fighting alongside them. They followed him through frozen winters and scorching summers, through skirmishes and pitched battles, because they knew their leader was fearless. Caesar's ambition eventually carried him to Rome itself, where he became dictator for life. Yet his assassination in the Senate in 44 BC proved that even the deadliest warriors could be vulnerable to betrayal. His campaigns, however, ensured that his influence endured, and his writings provided insight into the mind of one of history's most brilliant military strategists. Julius Caesar was more than a general. He was a living force of strategy, leadership, and fear, whose impact on warfare and history remains unparalleled. Number 3. Hannibal Barca, Rome's nightmare. Across the mountains of Iberia and the Alps, a young Carthaginian boy swore vengeance against Rome. That boy grew into Hannibal Barca, one of the greatest tactical geniuses the world has ever known. His ambition, ingenuity, and ruthlessness would terrorize the mightiest empire of the ancient world. Hannibal's most legendary feat came during the Second Punic War. Leading an army, including elephants, across the treacherous Alps, he descended upon Rome's heartland with a force the Romans believed impossible. Battles at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and especially Cannae demonstrated his unmatched strategic mind. At Cannae, Hannibal's forces encircled a Roman army nearly double their size, annihilating it with precision and efficiency that remains a textbook example of military genius. Hannibal was not just a tactician. He was a psychological warrior. He studied his enemies, anticipated their moves, and exploited weaknesses mercilessly. Roman generals feared him, not only for his skill, but for the audacity and unpredictability with which he struck, For over a decade, Hannibal's name haunted the Republic. Though ultimately unable to conquer Rome entirely, Hannibal's campaigns reshaped the Mediterranean world, proving that intellect, courage, and ruthlessness could defeat even the most powerful empires. Hannibal Barca remains a symbol of strategic mastery and battlefield deadliness. Number 2. Vlad the Impaler, the Blood Count of Wallachia. In the shadowed forests of Wallachia, a prince ruled with iron and terror. Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, transformed fear into a weapon, striking terror into the hearts of enemies and leaving a legacy that inspired the legend of Dracula. Vlad was a man forged by betrayal, political intrigue, and constant threat. His deadliness lay not only in combat but in psychological warfare. Invaders feared his approach as villages discovered impaled soldiers lining the roads, a gruesome warning to anyone who dared challenge him. Ottoman armies learned quickly that to face Vlad was to risk unimaginable suffering. But Vlad was also a brilliant military strategist. He used the terrain of Wallachia to his advantage, setting traps, ambush, and defensive fortifications that made it nearly impossible for enemies to succeed. His ruthlessness extended to traitors, rebels, and even nobles who opposed him, ensuring loyalty through fear and respect alike. Vlad the Impaler's reign was brief, yet unforgettable. In death, his legend only grew, a testament to a warrior who wielded fear as skillfully as a sword, and whose reputation ensured his place among the deadliest figures in history. Number 1. Alexander Nevsky, the ultimate warrior of Russia. At the pinnacle of this countdown stands a man whose courage, strategy, and faith forged the destiny of a nation, Alexander Nevsky. In the 13th century, Russia faced invasion from both the Germanic Teutonic Knights and the Swedish armies. Alexander emerged as a leader whose deadliness on the battlefield and brilliance in command would save his people and carve his name into history. At the battle on the ice in 1242, Alexander's forces faced overwhelming odds on the frozen surface of Lake Peipus. The knights, heavily armored and confident, charged across the ice, but Alexander's tactical foresight turned the frozen lake into a deadly trap. The ice gave way under the weight of the invaders, while his disciplined forces crushed those who survived, securing a legendary victory that would echo through centuries. Alexander was not just a fighter, he was a strategist, diplomat, and unifier. His leadership preserved Russian lands from foreign domination, and his ability to inspire loyalty ensured that his men would fight with unmatched courage. He was a warrior whose skill was only matched by his vision for his people's survival. Alexander Nevsky's legacy transcends the battlefield. He represents the ultimate warrior, fearless, cunning, strategic, and committed to a cause greater than himself. It is for this reason that he claims the top spot in our countdown of history as Deadliest Warriors. From gladiators to conquerors, from samurai to kings, these warriors shaped the world through courage, skill, and sheer ferocity. History remembers them not just for the battles they won, but for the indelible mark they left on humanity. Which of these warriors do you think would dominate in a fight if all time and space were stripped away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's deadliest fighters, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an epic countdown like this. History is alive, and it's waiting for you to discover it one legend at a time.